Hey guys, in the previous game development video, we set up this new project to make a simple first-person shooter game, and we created these little objects that we can shoot to get points, and we did all the basic stuff like adding the sky, adding the ground, creating a directional light for simulating the sun, and we created the functionality for hit scan, so we use a line trace to interact with these objects. The point of this game is not to be an awesome game. It's a good way to learn the simple concepts of Unreal Engine to get started. So what we're going to do this time is add some more game logic so we can spawn these objects on a timer. And also I want to add a little button that we can walk up to and press, and it'll restart the round. And then after that we can do some more fun stuff like sound effects, explosion effects if you shoot the objects. So actually the first thing we need to do is, I realized that the crosshair is not exactly centered because we copied these files from the template project, and I guess the people at Epic Games slightly mess it up, or it's just an outdated version that used to work and doesn't now. But it's not a huge deal, we just have to adjust the coordinates of the crosshair a little bit in order for it to be exactly centered. Our line trace was still perfectly accurate because it's based on the camera's direction, but first of all what we have to do is take out this little +20 on the y coordinates, because remember we copied this file from the player object that fired projectiles that had a trajectory, not using hit scan. So we don't want to have the crosshair lowered on the screen, that's what this does, because that was only for the projectile, like to compensate for the gravity on the projectile. So let's just delete that. Now we still have to do another thing, because for some reason they don't account for the size of the texture, which is 16 by 16 on the crosshair. So what we should do is actually subtract. I did this by trial and error. I found out that we need to subtract the coordinates by 8. So let's just do this real quick. Integer minus integer minus 8. Let me copy that. Do the same thing for the y coordinate. And now the crosshair is actually centered. Doesn't make a huge difference, but kind of important if you're actually trying to make a game. So now if we're right on the edge of the objects, they don't trigger, but then right when we cross over the boundary, it works. So if you tried it before, you might notice that on the edges it wasn't exactly accurate. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start creating the game object for spawning these into the world. So let's go into our blueprints folder. We created the target object last time, so now we're going to create a new blueprint called the target object spawner. So this is going to be an actor as well, just like the target object, like most objects in the game. Let's name it target object spawner, and let's go into here. So last time we had to add a 3D model, but this time we're just going to leave it empty. It's just going to be a little object in the world that isn't actually visible. So we're just going to have some logic in here. So let's just start with a basic system and then work our way up to make it a little bit more complex. So first of all, I just want this thing to spawn an object into the same location every like 2 seconds. So what we can use for that is this tick function. This is going to be called every update, or kind of like every frame, but it's more often than frames. And it actually provides you the delta seconds, which is the time change in seconds of the previous update. So if you need to do math like physics or timing stuff like we're going to be doing, then you need to use this variable that's provided by this event tick that tells you how much time has passed since the previous update. So we're going to use this to update our own variables, the timing variables, and use all that to create the timing system. So first, we should start out by making a couple variables ourselves, and those are we need to have a variable to store the amount of time between spawning actions. So first of all, let's create a float, which is like a decimal value. So create a new variable by pressing this plus, and then we can go over here, change the type to float, and we're going to name this spawn timer, or spawn time. Let's go ahead and save and compile this so we can adjust the default value right here. And this is going to be 2, which is 2 seconds. So We also need to have a variable that stores the amount of time that's passed since the previous spawn. So what we should do is create one called time since last spawn. And by default, this is going to be 0, so we don't need to change anything here. And every single tick, every update of the game, we want to take this value, and this is going to be 0 to start. We want to get the time since last spawn and add on the delta seconds and set the new time since last spawn. That way we can keep track of time in our program. So let's also get a set of this. And what we need to do is add these together. It's very easy. Just type the plus symbol, float plus float. Take that, plug it in there. Now we take the sum and plug it back into the variable. So this is going to be constantly increasing as the game is running. And it's just going to go endlessly for right now, the way this is set up. So now what we need to do is check if this value reaches the other value, spawn time. So what we can do is use a branch. Branches are like if statements, so we can use them to make logical decisions in programs. So type in branch, we're going to take this, and now this is going to check if that Boolean condition that we plug in is true or false, and that's just a variable. So what we need to do is check if this number is greater than this number. So let me get this number, just say get spawn time, and we can simply take this number, type in the greater than symbol, float greater than float. This is going to give us the Boolean that's going to be true or false depending on this condition. So once this number reaches 2, then this will be true, but otherwise, until then, it'll be false. So when it's false, we don't want to do anything because it's not time to spawn a new object yet. But once it's true, we need to do a couple things. First of all, we want to reset the time since last spawn. So let's go ahead and set this to 0. Otherwise, if we don't do that, then it's just going to, every single update of the game, 100 times a second, it's going to be spawning a new object, and we don't want that. So first of all, let's just set it to 0. Now this is going to be like the part that actually spawns an object. I think what we should do to keep it simplified is create a separate function that we can just put the logic for that inside of there and then call that function right here. So let's create a new function, sort of just like a capsule of logic. I mean, it's the same thing as if I was to put it in here, but it's just to keep it more organized. So let's create a new function called spawn target object. And let's go back to the main event graph here and just take that function and plug it in. So whenever this is executed, it'll call this function. Now in the spawn target object is where we're going to do the logic for spawning an object. It's actually very easy. There's just a function that we can call called spawn actor by class, or spawn actor from class, and we can just give it the type of object. A class is a type of object, and ours is called target object here. So we just have to select the class. We search for our object that we want to spawn, called target object, and that's about it. If we don't give it a location here, the transform is a location, rotation, and scale. If we don't plug it in, it'll be a default of 0, 0, 0. So let's go ahead and make a little transform real quick, just so it's not spawning into the ground, because I think right now 0, 0, 0 is going to be in the ground. So let's go ahead and drag this way, make transform, and we can just plug in the values of the location. So what location do we want? Let's look at our level. Let's go ahead and spawn these. This is a good location here. So let's see, it's at 580 about, so let's just say 600 and Z200. 600, Z200, and let's see if that works. Let's go ahead and move these other target objects. I'm just going to shift click these all. move them out of the way for a sec. Let's click play, see if every 2 seconds it'll spawn an object or not. Oh, you know what? I didn't put that object into the world, so we gotta click and drag. It's gonna be invisible in game. Doesn't matter where it is in the world, but it should be doing its thing now. There's one. Oh, yep. So it's just trying to spawn them on top of each other. So that's what happens there. Alright, so now what we should do is randomize the location. So let's go back into the target object spawner. Let's go ahead and drag this way to make a vector, because a vector is just a combination of an XYZ location basically. And this is going to be anywhere, let's say, let me just see what ranges we're dealing with here. So if I'm looking over here, the X can be anywhere from, oh wait, the X is going to be locked. Let's say the X is locked, and the Y is going to be anywhere from -1000 to +1000. And the Z can be, let's just have it drop out of the sky, like locked at 1000 or something. So let's go back in here. So we're just going to lock those values. 1000 for the Z. Let's put the X at like 800. Now the Y is going to be anywhere between -1000 and +1000. So we can drag off of this Y to create a float value. So this is going to give us all the actions that would provide a float. Now let's just type in random, see what we can find. Random float. Oh, random float in range. That's exactly what we need. Minimum -1000. Maximum +1000. Change the spawn time to be a little bit more frequent. Actually 0.5 is probably good. Half a second between each spawn, just to see what it looks like. So now they're going to be falling out of the sky. Pretty cool. And of course, if you want to randomize the X value, let's just go ahead and do that. So go back in here, copy this, either Control-C, Control-V, or just Control-W to duplicate. Plug it in here. The X is going to be, let's say, from 500 to 1000. There we go, a little bit of variation in that coordinate. I think that's pretty good. So I think the next thing to do is just create the button object to restart the round. So what we should do, let's make another blueprint, another actor. This one is going to be the reset button. And there's ways to import our own 3D models, but that'll be for a separate video. Let's just go ahead and make this a little simple cube or something. Search for static mesh, which is a 3D model, and we can assign the 3D model as anything provided by the template project. So let's just start with a cube. We can actually have multiple of these, so let's just make a little little fancy combination of shapes here. We got a static mesh. Let's add another one. Let's put a little cylinder. So add another static mesh. Let's just call it cylinder so we can tell. And I'll name this one cube or box. So the cylinder, we're gonna assign. I think there's a cylinder. Yeah. There we go. Let's scale it down a little bit. And material, something fancy. We already used gold. Let's use a copper button. And the box can be like stone, cobblestone or something. Alright, so what we need to do is add a new input first for the player. Let's do that first. So let's just leave this here for a sec. And so we have the left click mapped to the fire action. Let's just map like the E button to a different action. And in order to add inputs to your game, it's pretty easy. You just have to go to Edit, Project Settings, Input over here, and you can create in action mappings any type of action you want with any input button. So let's see what we got. Right now we just have jump on spacebar, or if you're using a controller, there's different buttons for that. We have the fire action. This is reset VR, which we don't need. I'm just going to delete that. So let's make a new action called interact. And let's choose, with this drop down menu, let's search for E. E. There's a lot of things with E in them, by the way. Keyboard. There it is. So that's about all we have to do there. This is going to save automatically, so you can just click the red X. Now, in the player, we already created the functionality to do line tracing and check if we're looking at an object like this. So what we can do is just copy that code from the player, which is in here, and just copy paste. So see this input action fire. Now if we search for input action, we can see our interact, which is going to be called whenever we press the E button. Also, if we wanted to do anything when we release the E button, we can do something with that too. But for now, let's just go ahead and copy all this. Let me move this out of the way so I can select all these. Control W, move it down here. So let's just plug this in here. So now this time, instead of looking for the target objects, we want to cast to reset buttons. And if you want to catch up, if this doesn't make any sense to you, you should watch the previous video, the link in the description. Instead of casting to target object, we want to cast to reset button in order to check if this object is a reset button. So let's just cast to reset button and just take the stuff that was plugged into the other one and plug it into here. This is a function of the target object, so we're going to have to create a new function for the reset button. So let's go ahead and delete that. Delete that. Now, if the cast failed, which means we didn't hit a reset button, it's not going to do anything. So we don't need to subtract points like we were doing with the target object. We can actually just delete all this score stuff. So we just need to attach something to this executable wire, all the logic for resetting the round. So let's go back into the reset button object and create a function. And to do that, we just click this plus button right here, create a new function called reset rounds, and then go back into the player. Let me open them both up. Probably do this. Open up this. There we go. So as reset button, we can probably search for that now and find it. Reset round. There we go. So now, oh, what's this? Warning. Could not find the function. Oh, it's probably not built. Compile. It's probably going to go away now. The error. Compile this. Okay, it's good. So in here, there is actually a way to just reload a level. So I'm going to try that, see if it resets everything. Load level. Oh, it's called open level. And we just have to type in the name of the level, and Unreal Engine will find it. So this is called target practice level. So let's put this into the world and see what happens, and troubleshoot from there. Boom. Let's see if this resets. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. Hey, it works. So let's see. I'm pretty sure it resets a score. So we got 4 points. Boom. Yep, we went back to 0. I mean, that was pretty easy, right, guys? Okay, so one thing I want to do is limit the amount of spawning. So we're not going to have these things spawning forever. like that, because that's not the type of thing you want in any game, because any unlimited spawning like that would eventually crash a system. What we need to do is, in the target object spawner, have a variable called maximum target objects, or maximum targets, and this is going to be an integer. We don't need to have any decimal values with that. And let's just say we want to only have a maximum of 10 objects. So there we go. We just have to go into the logic in the main event graph. And so if, let's see, where do I want to put this condition? So we can actually just use the same branch and say, if this condition is met, which is the timing logic, we could say, and the other condition is met, then it does this stuff. So let's just take this, and instead of plugging it straight into the branch, let's say and. So the other logic is going to be current number of targets is less than the maximum number of targets. So how do we get the current number of targets in the world? Well, there's a function called getAllActors of class, and we're going to have to actually run an executable wire through this. So let's move all this, take that white executable wire, just plug it into here, run it through. Now this is going to give us an array of all the objects of the type of class that we give it. So let's type in target object, and this array is like a list of all the objects, and what we can do is get the size of this. Is it length or size? It's length. So it's an integer, this light green color. That's what integers are in Unreal. So this is a number that we're going to have to say, if this is less than the maximum number of targets, then we want to spawn. So let's say less than, and see if I can organize this a little bit better. So plug this into the other ands. All right, not too bad. So let's see. Yeah, it works. So I think that's about gonna wrap it up for this video. In the next videos, we're gonna talk about some more special effects stuff like sound effects, explosions. Maybe when you shoot an object, it has a force that it applies to all the other objects, so it's like an actual explosion. And then I'll also talk about how to create physical materials and visual materials. So you can adjust mass of objects, you can adjust the friction, the bounciness, and we'll also talk about just the basic textures, the bump maps on them, so you can see how light reflects on them, and we can adjust how reflective each object is. So, but I think this is a good way to get started. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you guys next time.